Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about this video and this subject that I thought would be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be another conversation about Mr. Soul with Canelo Alvarez. You know, a lot of you might be wondering why I talk so much about Canelo Alvarez, and I have some people, especially with the David Benavidez situation. I've had some people ask me, before overall, why you talking so much about the situation, or why do you talk so much about Canelo Alvarez? Are you a Canelita lover and all this other stuff? It's, by the way, if you're using terms overall like Canelita or stuff like that, as soon as I see you trying to demean a fighter overall in that way, that pretty much tells me overall exactly what your main motivations are. That you usually have a personal problem with that fighter. And I've seen it overall with a bunch of different fighters. I don't have a personal love or a personal hatred towards any of these fighters. All I'm going to tell you is my perspective, and what I personally think is going on. And if I can't necessarily dictate exactly what's going on, then I might tell you what I think might be possibly happening, but I probably won't delve out, any 100% complete criticism unless they've shown me a particular pattern in the past, like that of Gervonta Tank Davis. And don't get me wrong, Canelo Alvarez, he's had some moments in his career where you can maybe criticize him. But the reason why I wanted to do this is because Andre SOG Ward, and this is probably going to be the last conversation about Canelo, at least for a little bit, until his up and coming fight against Jaime Munguia. The reason why I wanted to do this fight really was because a couple of conversations within my comment section. And I thought that it would be perfect to talk about it here because Andre SOG Ward brought up a certain amount of points within the interview that I believe he had with the Breakfast Club, stating overall a lot of the points that the LDBC and new media have been stating about Canelo for the longest time, which is that in their view, he's a good fighter but not a great fighter, and that he's been a cherry pick throughout his whole entire career, and that he doesn't fight people at their best, all this other shit. And don't get me wrong, listen, once again, there's certain things that you can maybe criticize Canelo Alvarez for. Like, if you want to criticize him for vacating his belt at the middleweight division, when he claimed that he wanted to be, that he wanted to be unified at the middleweight division, even though he didn't fight Demetrius Bivol Andrade. Listen, I get it. You can kind of criticize Canelo Alvarez for that. That's understandable. If Canelo was truly avoiding that of David Benavidez, and it's very abundant and clear, then Canelo Alvarez is going to get a lot of well-warranted criticism, and very well-deserved. All that's understandable. I'm not here to protect anyone necessarily. I'm just here overall to state what I personally think is going on. And at the end of the day, I get a certain amount of comments whenever I talk about Canelo, and every once in a while, there's always a guy that states that, oh, Canelo's a complete fraud of a fighter. He's not a great fighter. And I was having this debate in my comment section the other day where he was stating that, and I'm not just going to talk about Canelo in this one, but also about some other fighters, also including Tyson Fury. Because we have to be very careful, including myself, that when you really talk about somebody or you give, a dissection, and people think that they're going to be quote unquote real and they're going to state whatever they kind of want to, it's, is it that, overall that you're really giving a very honest criticism, or is that you have a very personal problem with that fighter? Because if you're stating something, once again, that is within the bounds of reality or something that can be proven with some sort of logic or evidence, then that's fine. Like, if you want to state overall that, what, I didn't really like how Canelo Alvarez went out in the middleweight division. He said that he wanted to be unified there, but yet he clearly did not want to fight Demetrius Bivol Andrade. That's something that can kind of overall be relevant. That's fine. But to state something along the lines of overall that Canelo, that he's a good fighter, that he's not an all-time great fighter, that he's not within the other Mexican greats and blah, 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 and he's never fought a guy in their prime, and, he's just been a cherry pick throughout his whole entire career, I can't agree with that. And I also see this with other fighters as well. Like, I was having a debate with one of my watchers, I believe, and he was stating about Tyson Fury, and we were going back and forth a little bit, not in a disrespectful way, of course. I always like to respect people whether I agree with them or disagree with them. But, he was stating at first overall how he believes that Tyson Fury overall is garbage and that his resume is trash. Well, I can't really call Tyson Fury's resume garbage or him garbage, because if Tyson Fury is garbage, what does that make Vladimir Klitschko when Tyson Fury defeated him? And what does that make Deontay Wilder and Dillian White when Tyson Fury was able to completely dominate them? You can say whatever you want to about Tyson Fury, but Tyson Fury has always shown up to play ball whenever he's needed to against dominant guys. But we're going to talk about that as the video goes along, because I don't want to talk too much in the beginning, and I want to talk a lot of it pretty much in the middle of the video, so we'll see where it goes. But anyways, Andre SOG Ward, who of course was another all-time great fighter, he's going to be talking about Canelo Alvarez, and of course bringing up a lot of the same points that the LDBC and the media have brought up. And I gotta wonder with Mr. Andre SOG Ward, even though I think that he believes in somewhat of what he says, is a part of this overall because he has a little bit of a personal problem with Canelo Alvarez, and could it partially be because, maybe not jealousy, but there's a little bit of him still trying to stay relevant and realizing that a lot of people are going to try to put Canelo Alvarez over himself. Because Canelo, of course, has now been the unified champion at 168 pounds. He's a four-weight division champion, and he's another great fighter, and he wasn't too far after that of the Andre Ward generation. Andre and Canelo did fight pretty much within the same generation, but Canelo, of course, became the #1 pound-for-pound fighter kind of somewhat shortly after Andre Ward retired. Andre Ward became the #1 pound-for-pound fighter after Floyd Mayweather Jr. retired. And, of course, he was able to beat Sergey the Crusher Kovalev, But, it is what it is. But anyways, once again, we have to always ask ourselves, including myself, because sometimes I can be a victim of this as well. Are you really giving a complete, accurate, and logical criticism, or is it possibly because there's a little bit of emotion or a little bit of bias or a little bit of vitriol there? You have to be very careful. You have to realize a lot of the arguments, and is there something logical overall that can actually prove that? But we're going to talk about that as this goes along. Anyways, Dante's Boxing Nation is going to talk about it. Let's tune in.
I don't fucking care. Yeah. I represent Mexico.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? You ever been in a situation where maybe you were in a room, you were at school, you were at work, anywhere, and everyone in that room, they were thinking the same thing, but no one wanted to actually say it? And then when one person stands up and he actually says it, then all of a sudden you hear everybody saying, man, I was thinking the exact same thing. And then just like that, now everyone in the room, they're comfortable with talking about this topic. And this is exactly what we have seen in the boxing industry when it comes to Canelo Alvarez. For years, I have been exposing Canelo Alvarez with irrefutable receipts. And now it has...
Well, you've been trying to expose Canelo Alvarez, Dante. Let's really be real about you and Canelo Alvarez here for a second. You know that you have to tear down Canelo Alvarez even when he defeats elite level opponents, because you don't want someone that looks like him at the top of a pound for pound list. That's really the main reason, And don't get me wrong, I'm not stating that, Canelo has never had questionable moves in his career. But at the end of the day, to say something along the lines of, Canelo is a good Mexican fighter, not a great fighter, that's just asinine. That's just ridiculous. And people will say, can Canelo really be compared with the other all-time great Mexican fighters? Not only can he be compared to the other all-time great Mexican fighters, there's a very good chance that Canelo is the greatest Mexican boxer of all time. It is what it is. Because who are we really going to put Canelo Alvarez? Who are we really going to put over Canelo Alvarez? Is it going to be Marco Antonio Barrera? We can't have that because Marco Antonio Barrera was never thought of as the debatable best fighter of his time. On top of that, he's not as skilled as Canelo Alvarez. He don't have as many A-grade names on his resume as Canelo. He lost some of the bigger fights in his generation, even when they were similar in size or coming up in weight, like a Manny Pacquiao or Eric Morales or a Junior Jones. It just is what it is. Can it be Eric Morales? It can't be Eric Morales because Eric Morales was not able to triumph in the trilogy versus that of Manny Pacquiao or against that of Marco Antonio Barrera. So it can't be Eric Morales. Can it be Juan Manuel Marquez? It can't be Juan Manuel Marquez because Marquez also suffered too many losses in his career and he was never thought of as the best fighter of his generation. All right? It is what it is. When it comes down to it, that's why he lost, the majority of those 4 fights against Manny Pacquiao and also lost to Floyd Mayweather Jr. Now, Canelo Alvarez, of course, lost to Floyd Mayweather Jr., but after Floyd Mayweather Jr. retired, and then once Canelo kind of reached his mountaintop peak, Canelo was looked at as very highly debatably the best fighter of his generation. And if you were to end the generation right now and completely cut it off, when you talk about the fighters that would be looked at as the best of their generation, you're talking about Canelo, you're talking about Inoue, Crawford, you're talking about Usyk and Tyson Fury. Those are the 5 fighters that you're talking about, at least in my personal view. Those are the best fighters of their generation. At least when you talk about the creme de la creme, Canelo's up there. It is what it is.
Finally reached the point to where everyone is speaking on the Canelo Alvarez.
And then, of course, speaking about other fighters, can it be Salvador Sanchez? I mean, Salvador Sanchez is an all-time great fighter, no doubt about it. Heavily skilled fighter. But I can't put someone over Canelo that was only a champion in one weight class and then on top of that only had, about 3 title defenses. We don't do that with other fighters when it comes down to it. So I can't do it with Salvador Sanchez. I'm sorry. And then, of course, Juan Manuel Marquez. great fighter once again, but like I said, there's a reason why he lost also some of the bigger fights in his career. Say whatever you want to about Canelo, but Canelo has won the majority of the bigger fights in his career. And we can state all we want to about, overall, when it comes down to it, Canelo, he had controversial decisions over that, of Erislandy Lara and Gennady Golovkin. All right, that's cool. But then when we talk about, the alleged him being, below Marquez and Morales and Barrera, like, you can't even say that they were controversial losses because they got their ass kicked. Like, Morales and Barrera got their skins completely skinned against that of Manny Pacquiao. Like, it is what it is, or at least, in the majority of those fights. Eric Morales, of course, was able to pull out in the first one against Pacquiao, but, then in the rematches, Pacquiao pretty much was able to pretty much absolutely skin him alive. So you can say whatever you want to, but at least it was looked at as, quote-unquote controversial to where Canelo could have potentially won. In the second fight, I had Canelo Alvarez winning, and a lot of these LDBC and new media guys did as well. They're only now recently stating that Canelo Alvarez lost to Gennady Golovkin in the second fight because they no longer need to tear down Gennady Golovkin. Gennady Golovkin was the main threat back then. Canelo was the main threat now. So that's the reason why they're switching sides. It is what it is.
Situation, and they're not holding their tongue anymore. And they're saying word for word what I've been saying for years, because the whole truth is not interchangeable. With that being said, Andre Ward, he had a whole lot to say about Canelo Alvarez and the ducking he's been doing his entire career.
This guy could rise.
Yes, the ducking that Canelo Alvarez has done in his entire career by facing Gennady Golovkin, Austin Trout, Erislandy Lara, Miguel Cotto, Sergey Kovalev, Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant, Callum Smith, Danny Jacobs, Jermell Charlo, Chavez Jr., all these guys. Yes, Canelo Alvarez is just the biggest cherry pick of all time.
Up and then he'll duck that dude. He just wants a payday. Like, yeah, they want a payday. That's the position you in. What you think this is? So
I do agree with Andre SOG Ward that at the end of the day, that if you're a champion like Canelo and you claim that you want to be great, that at the end of the day, you can claim that these guys want to pay all you want to. But at the end of the day, if you're a champion, you're going to have to be that guy. You're going to have to face some of those guys. But Canelo also uses a similar tactic that Floyd Mayweather Jr. did a lot of the times, where some of the younger fighters especially, sometimes he'll kind of let them fight each other when it comes down to it. That way, overall, he can get one or two targets out of the way, and then he can just potentially face that guy and say, see, I'm going to beat those other fighters as well. That's something that Floyd Mayweather Jr. did very similarly. Like when Keith Thurman, when Keith Thurman overall was on the rise, he called Floyd Mayweather Jr. out multiple times, and Floyd said, okay, you can fight me, but then fight Errol Spence Jr., and then Keith Thurman backed off because he knew the threat that Errol Spence Jr. was. Because Floyd knew that could have been a potential two problems if either one of them became a champion. So he said, you know what, I'm going to, instead of having to fight both of those guys, I'm going to let, one of those guys, fight each other, or those guys fight each other. And then I'm just going to beat overall the winner of that guy, or potentially beat the winner of that guy. And that way I kind of get the credit overall for somewhat beating both of them. Or, there doesn't have to be a conversation about me fighting that other guy. And some people overall might say that that's a duck, but in my view, it's not really that bad, especially if overall you want to prove that you're the best of the best. And that could be that what Canelo Alvarez is doing with David Benavidez, especially, possibly, if he wants him to fight the winner of Bivol versus Benavidez. Once again, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Canelo's side said, hey, listen, you're allegedly this good and you want to make a super fight with me. Why don't you possibly take care of my problem at 175 pounds? If you can beat Dimitri Bivol, overall the fighter that recently beat me, then possibly, we can make, a super fight at 175. That way overall there's something in it, especially for both of us, and we can make even a bigger amount of money. It could be that. I don't know.
Like, man.
But like I stated, to say that Canelo Alvarez has just been cherry picking his whole entire career, I mean, you can state once again that there are certain fights that did not happen. But when you talk about a fighter, once again, that's cherry picked throughout the whole entire career, you're talking about guys like Gervonta Tank Davis and Mikey Garcia. And I'm not saying that Gervonta Tank Davis is necessarily doing it to the degree that Mikey Garcia did. Because literally every time there was a mega threat, Mikey Garcia would never fight them. Like, he would never fight them. He didn't fight Yuriorkis Gamboa. All of a sudden he had this 2-year layoff. And who knows, that could have been some issues, behind the scenes. It could have been. I don't know. To be fair, I haven't done the max amount of research. But he didn't fight Yuriorkis Gamboa when he was a threat. He didn't fight Jorge Linares when he was the main threat at 135. And he avoided Vasily Lomachenko like the bubonic plague.
It's a guy that's a threat. Like even Dimitri Bivol, the dude you lost to. Mm-hmm. You got to give him credit for going up in weight, but I feel like he miscalculated, though. That was a miscalculation. And
what Andre Ward is basically stating there by miscalculation is that he's saying that Canelo did not think he was going to be as good as what he was. And that's very possible. I think that that's also very possible as well. You know, I think that's why part of the reason why Canelo looked so bad in that fight, because he gained way too much muscle mass. I think overall that he thought that he was just going to bully Dimitri Bivol and that eventually Bivol was going to just get into submission. That's not what happened. Dimitri Bivol is a real deal fighter. And I don't think that Canelo knew all the way what type of fighter he was getting in the ring with. I think he knew that he was getting into the ring with a great fighter, but not the level of fighter overall that he expected. I think he expected an A-grade fighter. I don't think that he expected an A-plus level fighter. He got in the ring with an S-tier level fighter. Canelo didn't know it was going to be like that. So I agree a little bit with that, but at the end of the day, Canelo, you still have to give him a lot of props for fighting Dimitri Bivol in the first place, because Bivol is known in the boxing world still as an elite level fighter. But like I said, to claim that Canelo has just done this because, like I said, the debate that I was having with this person the other day, and they were claiming that Canelo has never fought a fighter in their prime and all sorts of stuff, you know, and I said, well, that's not true, because when he fought Gennady Golovkin, Austin Trout, Lara, Plant, Saunders, and you know, what was his name, Smith, and, you know, Danny Jacobs and Jamel Charlo, and even some other guys, yeah, those guys were in their prime. And he told me overall that, oh, you know, you can't be in your prime at 36 years old. Yes, you can be in your prime at 36 years old. Bernard Hopkins was in his prime within his late 30s to early 40s, believe it or not. All right, when it comes down to Floyd Mayweather Jr. was in his prime at 36 years old. Terrence Crawford is going to turn 36 this year. He's still in his prime. Okay? Now, you can say maybe that, you know, if you want to talk about, you know, some of those fighters at their absolute peak or at their absolute, you know, overall best, maybe sometimes they weren't there, but Gennady Golovkin was. Like, people act like Gennady was having, like, major slippage before Canelo fought him. That's not what happened. Now, if you want to state that Canelo really dragged out that fight, yeah, you can state that. He even, you know, vacated one of his titles, you know, all that's understandable. But at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez eventually fought him, and it's not like he fought Gennady when he was, you know, basically done. He fought Gennady Golovkin after he beat Danny Jacobs, which was one of the biggest fights in boxing. Like, you know, I had, you know, some people overall state to me, like, well, yeah, you know, Gennady Golovkin fought Danny Jacobs, but it was a super close fight. It was supposed to be a super close fight. And the fact that you're bringing up that point tells me you really don't know anything about boxing. Like, it's no offense against certain people, but a lot of people, you know, comment about shit that they really have no room to comment about because they don't have the intelligence or they don't do the research overall in that particular sport or in that area. It just is what it is. Like, I can tell overall when someone knows shit about boxing when someone doesn't. You know, it just is what it is. Of course, that was supposed to be a close fight because Danny Jacobs was a guy that got in the ring against Peter, you know, Kid Chocolate Quillen, who, by the way, was supposed to fight Gennady Golovkin. That was looked at as the best middleweight fight in the world, but Peter Quillen wanted to fight him because he was scared to death of him. He wanted to fight Gennady Golovkin. You know, so it is what it is. So then he fought Danny Jacobs on the PBC, and Danny Jacobs shocked the world overall, not necessarily by beating Peter Quillen, but by knocking him out in the first round. You know, so then that fight ended up happening. Gennady beat him by a narrow decision, and then afterwards he fought Canelo. I thought Canelo lost. They gave him a draw because Canelo, of course, is the bigger star out of the two, and they had future plans for him more than they had for Golovkin. You know, and then, of course, you know, he fought and beat Vanes Martirosyan. You know, overall, when he had fought the fighters like Jamel Charlo, Demetrius Bouba-Andrade, Erislandy Lara, hadn't even been knocked down, I believe, by any of those fighters. And then Gennady Golovkin got in the ring against Vanes Martirosyan and KO'd him badly within 2 rounds. That's the Gennady Golovkin that Canelo Alvarez fought. Not this dude that was a super old man and completely washed up. All sort of bullshit. Yes, Gennady Golovkin was 36 years old, but he was still at the peak of his powers. So don't let people tell you that bullshit. All that is a bunch of horse shit. He fought Danny Jacobs when he also became a champion right after Sergey Dervyachenko. You know, he fought that of Billy Joe Saunders when he was an undefeated champ, 2-weight division champ. He fought Caleb Plant when he was an undefeated champion. He fought Callum Smith when he was an undefeated champion. Even though overall I believe that he was coming off of a bad performance over that of, what was his name? John Ryder, I believe. You know, when it comes down to a fight that I personally never watched, but I heard that it wasn't a great performance. All that's well and good, but the point is that Canelo has fought plenty of fighters in their prime. And even the fighters with Sergey Kovalev and Miguel Cotto, you can probably argue that they weren't at the absolute peak of their powers when it comes down to it, but to state that they weren't A-grade fighters, no, I just can't agree with that. Sergey Kovalev was a legitimate champion at the light heavyweight division. And then on top of that, you know, he was dominating a later Alvarez in their rematch, completely embarrassed him. You know, who was an elite fighter at the 175-pound division at that time. And then, of course, he embarrassed the up-and-coming young undefeated kid in Anthony Yard and whooped his ass other than 1 round from pillar to post. Like, you know, the LDBC new media will always tell you about that one round that Sergey Kovalev damn near got stopped in, right? But they won't talk about the other 11 rounds where Sergey Kovalev completely just battered that man. I mean, he completely whooped that dude's ass, and then he stopped him. So once again, it's like they never bring up that. It is what it is. That's the fighters that Canelo Alvarez defeated. You know, so to say that Canelo has never fought fighters in their prime or not fought A-grade level fighters, that's just stupid. It is what it is. And then once again, of course, I was having another debate overall with someone, you know, one of my watchers, you know, who of course I have a lot of respect for, you know, and he was stating overall, you know, that, you know, Fury, he beat a washed up Klitschko. Well, I'm sorry, sir, I can't agree with that. Because once again, if Klitschko would have been washed, he would have not been somewhat of the relatively unified champion of the world and undefeated for about 11 years. You know, and it would be understandable if Klitschko clearly was decreasing in the fights repeatedly. I mean, to be fair, in the previous fight against Brian Jennings, it wasn't the most impressive performance in the world. But when it came down to it, Vladimir Klitschko was still a dominant fighter. And then on top of that, once again, a year and a half later, he completely gave Anthony Joshua the fight of the year. So once again, I can't, you know, once again, there's a difference between a washed fighter and a fighter that's a little bit older. A washed fighter is Sugar Ray Leonard against Hector Macho Camacho. A washed champion or washed fighter is Sergio Martinez against Miguel Cotto. A washed fighter overall is probably Bernard Hopkins against Joe Smith Jr. You know, there's a difference between a fighter being a bit older and a fighter just being completely done. You know, like Kell Brook and Amir Khan, they were washed when they fought Terrence Bud Crawford.
The all-time great, don't you want to?
And once again, isn't that very interesting that the LDBC and new media, but new media especially, Terrence Bud Crawford gets so much credit for defeating Amir Khan and Kell Brook when they clearly were completely baked goods. They were done. They were chopped liver. You know, and Aki TV and Dante tried to say, can you believe that Terrence beat these A-grade fighters, these champions? They weren't championship level fighters anymore. But then you're going to say Canelo, when he actually defeated a legitimate champion in Cotto and that is Sergey Kovalev, that they were completely done. Like, you can state that they weren't at the peak of their power. Sure, that's all understandable. But if we're going to go with this energy overall just because, you know, oh, well, we can't give Canelo credit here because that guy had already lost before, or, you know, that guy wasn't coming off of a very good performance, or that guy was a little bit older, no problem. So let's start having the same energy with everybody else. Let's stop giving Manny Pacquiao credit over Marco Antonio Barrera then, because Barrera had already lost multiple times, I believe, in his career. Even though he was looked at as the best champion at that weight class at the time, he had already been knocked out before. So that means that we shouldn't give Manny Pacquiao credit for that fight, right? Or Eric Morales. He had already lost before, I believe, you know, when Manny Pacquiao defeated him. So let's not give Manny Pacquiao credit for either of those wins, right? That's what that means. Or Juan Manuel Marquez, you know, or Miguel Cotto. Let's stop giving Floyd Mayweather Jr. credit over Miguel Cotto because by the time that he defeated him, he had already been knocked out brutally twice. When it came down to, let's stop giving him credit over Oscar De La Hoya, who had already lost multiple times in his career and had been stopped by that time that Floyd Mayweather Jr. had fought him. Let's stop giving Floyd credit over Oscar De La Hoya. Let's stop giving him credit over Zab Judah, who had been stopped, I believe, once or twice in his career before he fought Floyd and already lost multiple times in his career. Let's stop giving Floyd credit for that fight. Let's stop giving him credit for the Sugar Shane Mosley fight, who was 38 years old, even though he was coming off of debatably the most dominant win in his career. So like I stated, we can go by these narratives all we want to, but are you using it overall because that's what you logically think, or is it because you just don't like that fighter? Because I see a lot of people overall, they're willing to use these, you know, standards for certain fighters, but then in a similar position, they're not willing to use that for their fighter or their favorite fighter. I see this a lot between the Inoue and the Terrence Bud Crawford fans. Like the Terrence Bud Crawford fans, and let's be real, a lot of the pro-black fans within that and new media and the LDBC, they're pissed off that Terrence Bud Crawford didn't get Fighter of the Year. Dude, Naoya Inoue ended up fighting more. He was just as dominant as Terrence Bud Crawford. He fought more champions. And he fought a guy that apparently on your list was top 10 pound for pound in Steve Cool Boy Fulton. So how are you going to be mad at that? And then they try to state that Terrence Bud Crawford, you know, that he has a way greater resume than Inoue. No, he doesn't. You can state overall that he has a better resume than that in Inoue, and that also goes for the Inoue fans. People will say that Inoue has a way better resume than Crawford. No, he doesn't. Because those guys, it's not like they have a dozen A-grade level fighters on their resume. They only have a couple. It is what it is. Crawford's A-grade wins in his career are against Gamboa, Postal, and that's even debatable if those are A-grade wins. But the for sure ones are Sean Porter and also that of Errol Spence. Amir Khan and Kell Brook do not count. When you talk about overall Naoya Inoue, you have Steve Cool Boy Fulton, Emmanuel Rodriguez, maybe Nonito Donaire, just because he had never lost to that weight class before Inoue got there, and he was a champion, to be fair. You know, and there might be one other fighter, maybe. You know, but once again, you have to keep the same standards all around. And way too many people, they'll use this standard with certain fighters that they don't like, but then when it comes to another fighter, they'll completely change it.
Get that back.
He says he wants the rematch, but you know what's so interesting?
That's the key, though.
He
says he wants the rematch. Yeah. It's not gonna happen.
Because if Canelo did
Right, Andre Ward, and I understand that, and a lot of people overall probably state that, but to be honest with you, I don't really disagree with Canelo not taking that rematch. Because Canelo's not a natural light heavyweight fighter, Mr. Andre Ward. It's not like when you fought Sergey the Crusher Kovalev, and that was a rematch that needed to happen overall, because once again, that was between two top 10 pound-for-pound fighters, and on top of that, you guys are pretty much the same size. Like, Andre Ward was basically a light heavyweight fighter even before he moved up there. Because most 168-pounders, they really could easily fight at the light heavyweight division anyway. Andre Ward was another one of those fighters who pretty much was a light heavyweight. It is what it is. And I'm not trying to discredit him at all, but I'm just stating that. Like, those fighters like Carl Froch and Andre Ward, those guys, they're light heavyweights. They're not really any different overall from that of the light heavyweights. It's basically the same weight class. At least when you talk about it in terms of the size of those fighters. But anyways, when it comes down to, once again, you know, it wasn't like when Andre Ward rematched out of Sergey Crusher Kovalev, and those guys were basically in the same weight class. Canelo Alvarez is a guy that's already not as big as 168 pounders. It is what it is. He's already not as big as 168 pounders. Caleb Plant, Demetrius Andrade, Jamal Charlo, you know, even Jaime Munguia, you know, all these guys are bigger than Canelo, believe it or not. It is what it is. He rehydrates a little bit heavier, but remember, Canelo's only a 5'7" dude with a 71-inch arm reach. That's all he is, all right, when it comes down to it. You have to be extraordinarily skilled, you know, overall to have that reach and overall still beat fighters that are bigger than you. You know, this is why I stated that Canelo, in my view, is better and greater and would have beat Oscar De La Hoya, because Oscar's not a fighter that ever was going to do that against fighters that would have been heavily skilled, but also lengthier, you know, than him and bigger than him. You know, I don't really ever remember him doing that. It just is what it is. You know, but like I said, you know, the Dimitri Bivol loss, I mean, you know, that's great if you want to see the rematch. And I think that Canelo eventually might want that. But at the end of the day, I don't mind Canelo not taking it, because had he lost that fight, it would have heavily affected his marketability. And it's not like overall, once again, like Dimitri Bivol is his natural size. Bivol is a light heavyweight fighter. Canelo is pretty much a 160-pounder. He's already in a weight class where he's not the size of any of those guys there. Now, that doesn't mean overall that he should not fight his mandatories. Of course, he should fight his mandatories and the guys there. But at the end of the day, once again, the Gennady Golovkin rematch that Canelo had to take, he had to take that one because those guys were similar in size. So it would have been such a black mark in his career had he not rematched that guy. But Dimitri Bivol, that's looked at as a guy that, in my view, is a decent amount bigger than Canelo. And just as skilled as Canelo. So I don't mind Canelo not taking that rematch.
I want the rematch, he would have told DAZN when he was negotiating with them that I want that fight to be a part of the deal. I want to avenge that loss. But Canelo, he didn't even mention Bill.
Canelo was so slow on his feet in that fight. He was so slow and so lethargic. And don't get me wrong, Canelo was not usually quick on his feet anyway. That's, you know, pretty much the main fault that Canelo has. Really the only fault that he really has, which is that, you know, at least at this point in time in his career, you know, that he doesn't have the quickest of feet. But, you know, Canelo was even worse in that fight. You can tell that he gained way too much muscle mass. He thought that he was going to bully Dimitri Bivol. You could tell that the way that, you know, he was fighting. And then overall, once Bivol pushed him back, he knew that he did not have the stamina to move in and out really of those ranges. That's why he stood there and, you know, defended a lot of those shots and took some of those shots. You know, and very unfortunate for him because, once again, I think that potentially he could have put on a better performance, but he would have to be a little bit lighter than what he was in that fight.
Name when he talked to DAZN. And the craziest thing is that would have been the biggest fight that could have been made on DAZN. Canelo versus Bivol 2. Just like the biggest fight to make with Canelo on PBC would be Canelo versus David Benavidez.
So you got Benavidez right now, or you got Terrence Crawford, right? Oh, there's no credit if I fight Terrence Crawford. Well, you fought Amir Khan that was way smaller than you. And you knocked him out cold in Las Vegas at the T-Mobile Center. I was there. You didn't feel no...
I understand about that, Mr. Andre Ward, but let's also be real about the situation here for a minute. Terrence Bud Crawford is an elite-level boxer, and I understand that that's a part of the reason of what Andre Ward is bringing up. But let's be real here, dude. Why the hell would Canelo Alvarez want to fight someone overall like that of a Terrence Bud Crawford when he's 3 weight classes lighter than him? Now, in reality, he's probably only about 2 weight classes lighter than Canelo. But Canelo, like he stated perfectly, he said, if I fight Terrence Bud Crawford, I have everything to lose and nothing to gain in that fight. Why would I want to fight Terrence Bud Crawford right now? Like Terrence Bud Crawford, once again, is 3 weight classes under me. If I win against him, then people are just going to state that I beat a much smaller fighter, and I'm just going to get much more criticism. And if I lose to this guy, which potentially, I think overall that I would win that fight, but because I assume Canelo thinks that he would win that fight. I think that Canelo believes that he'll probably win every fight. But at the end of the day, at least mainly. But, Canelo Alvarez, it's like this kid also can really box. Like, this dude is a legitimate boxer. He's a guy that has an excellent skill set. So it's like, if I end up losing to this guy when there's just really nothing to gain at the current moment in time, my legacy is going to be completely out the window. It's going to be completely tarnished. Because I'm going to be the only fighter in history that ended up losing to a guy that came up 3 weight classes. So why the hell would I have a need to fight Terrence Bud Crawford? And he wouldn't really get any credit for defeating Terrence Bud Crawford anyway. All Andre SOG Ward would state, and all these other guys would say, is that Canelo Alvarez defeated a much smaller guy. Go fight David Benavidez. So Canelo knows that, and he's very shrewd and very smart overall once again, and not fighting that of Terrence Bud Crawford. I agree. There's no reason for that fight to happen. At least not until Terrence Bud Crawford proves that he can do stuff at 154 and 160.
About that, but now Terrence Crawford is too small and you won't get credit. We gotta be consistent.
And some people mentioned in the comment section saying, well, Canelo was gonna fight Errol Spence Jr. allegedly. So how come not Terrence Bud Crawford? Right, but Canelo Alvarez and Errol Spence, that was a fight that was supposed to be planned over a few years. Because Errol Spence was supposed to unify the welterweight division, and then eventually he was supposed to fill out at 160 and become a champion there. That's what was supposed to happen. But of course that didn't go according to plan because Terrence Crawford overall treated that man's head like a cue ball.
Mm-hmm. So I'm qualified to speak about this stuff and speak out against it because it's all kind of double standards in the game. So I try to mind my business. And then when I'm asked about it,
I somewhat understand where you're coming from, Mr. Andre Ward, but if we're also talking about someone overall that doesn't have a great resume, let's talk about your boy, Mr. Terrence Bud Crawford here real quick. Because how many legitimate A-grade wins does Terrence Bud Crawford really have? I remember one time there was a segment on ESPN. I was watching a video by Chronicles of Judo 144. Once again, great channel. He stated overall, he was talking about a video where the conversation was between, Vasily Lomachenko and Crawford about who is the potential #1 pound-for-pound fighter, between those two fighters. And Andre Ward was on the Stephen A. Smith and Max Kellerman show. And Andre Ward said, oh, well, Vasily Lomachenko, I can't put him as the #1 guy over Crawford because Lomachenko hasn't been in those big fights and blah, blah, blah. And Stephen A. Smith overall stated, well, Mr. Andre Ward, Terrence Crawford hasn't been in any of those big fights either. And then Andre Ward tried to play dumb, and he was like, what you mean? And then and then I remember Judah, he was saying, what you mean? You heard him. And at the end of the day, he was absolutely correct. Terrence Bud Crawford did not really fought any legitimate A-grade names at that point in time in his career. So once again, if we're also going to, talk about double standards, Mr. Andre Ward, let's talk about your boy, Mr. Terrence Bud Crawford. How many A-grade wins does that dude really have?
be honest. I'm going to be honest. Good fighter. Mm-hmm. Box office. Got his country.
Not just a good fighter, Mr. Andre Ward. Great fighter and all-time great fighter, period. And a fighter that is on your level.
But you got to give him credit for all the marketing and the money. Man, get that. But when you start talking about breaking down these resumes and start talking about who's the greatest and you mentioning yourself with other all-time Mexican greats, we got to have a conversation about that.
So you don't think those two fights will happen?
The conversation is very easy to figure out. Canelo Alvarez is one of the greatest Mexican fighters of all time. It's not even a debate as long as you know boxing. And he's probably debatably the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. Period. And that's where, in my view, a little bit of the hater energy has to come in. I like Andre Ward, and a lot of the stuff that he says, in my view, is very relevant, at least when it comes to certain topics. And some of the stuff with Canelo, I get where he's coming from. But it's like, at the end of the day, dude, come on, to state that Canelo doesn't really deserve, or to insinuate that he doesn't deserve to be talked about with other Mexican all-time greats. Like, are you serious? A four-weight division champion that has been completely unified in a weight division, defeated Cotto, Kovalev, Jamel Charlo, Danny Jacobs, Arasani Lara, Gennady Triple G, Golovkin, Saunders, Plant, and Smith, like all those guys. Like, are you serious, Andre? Like, come on.
Crawford and Benavidez.
It's not looking like it.
Damn.
But like the Golovkin situation, if they press him enough, he may.
Dre is absolutely right. If they press him hard enough.
And once again, I'm not really sure what's going on with these negotiations, but this over, and it could be very possible that Canelo is running away from Benavidez. Or maybe he's trying to stretch out the fight, or maybe Benavidez received something overall that he didn't like. Or maybe Canelo was trying to get a couple of other names on his resume before he fights Benavidez. I don't know. But it appears that Canelo wants Jaime Munguia, and then after that wants Jamal Charlo next. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, once again, isn't it very interesting that that the LDBC and new media, whenever it comes to a fighter that they don't like Canelo, or overall, Fury, pulling out of a fight or allegedly turning down a deal, it's always, completely confirmed, and that rumor is completely true, and then they start criticizing them immediately. But then when it comes to a fighter that they do like Gervonta Tank Davis or Crawford or Deontay Wilder, like remember when Wilder turned down that DAZN deal with AJ Anthony Joshua? They made all the damn excuses in the world of why that didn't happen, even though Wilder completely admitted it, and Dante was like, well, this just doesn't make any sense, Overall, Anthony Joshua must have been the problem, when all it was is that Deontay, in my personal view, he wasn't as serious about fighting Anthony Joshua as much as what he was stating, period. Or maybe there was just something behind the negotiations that he didn't like. I don't know.
He might end up fighting one of these guys. He might end up fighting against David Benavidez.
And once again, this is by no means am I saying that Canelo maybe is not avoiding David Benavidez. All I'm stating is that at the moment, there's certain things overall that to me seem a little bit odd about them. But we'll see.
Or Terrence Crawford. You guys have to remember, the way we got the Dimitri Bivol fight in the first place is because Canelo was forced to take the fight.
No, he wasn't forced to take the fight. Canelo Alvarez is a type of guy to where he can pick anyone that he wants to fight. And at the end of the day, what they wanted was that third Gennady Golovkin fight. Canelo wasn't really super interested in it. And then eventually, because he unified the 168-pound weight class, he tried overall once again to go to the light heavyweight division and wanted to unify there. That's what he wanted to try to do. But Dimitri Bivol, of course, had other plans.
He was stuck between a rock and a hard place. For the first time, Canelo Alvarez found himself in a position to where both of the options, or all of his options, was against the toughest competition.
Right, but Canelo Alvarez has always been facing the toughest competition, Dante. But Dante is always, once again, going to have to do this because what he wants to frame Canelo Alvarez is a guy that every time he was finally forced to fight the toughest competition, he lost. And that's just not the case. Once again, you cannot beat Gennady Golovkin and Lara and Danny Jacobs and all these other guys, the guys that Canelo Alvarez has beaten, and just be a complete cherry picker.
Canelo, he had
Once again, isn't it very interesting that fighters like Mikey Garcia, for example, who's another Mexican-American fighter, how many A-grade names do we really know on Mikey Garcia's resume? You know why Dante and these other guys never criticized Mikey Garcia? Because he was never a legitimate threat. Canelo is a legitimate threat. They know that if Canelo overall once again retires debatably as the best of his generation, that overall once again he's going to be in debates later on possibly as the greatest of all time, or at least overall within the top 20 to top 10, and I want to put him there quite yet, at least not within my top 10, but when it comes down to if Canelo's able to beat a few other fighters, he might debatably be there.
two offers on the table. One was to either fight David Benavidez, Jamal Charlo, and Errol Spence when he was undefeated, or two-fight deal fighting Dimitri Bivol and Gennady Golovkin.
Yes, and he took the toughest challenge on the table.
Fighting him in a third fight. But a lot of people have convenient memory and probably don't remember Canelo Alvarez had been avoiding Golovkin for years. In fact, he even vacated his belt to avoid Golovkin.
You can say it overall once again that was to avoid Golovkin. It's also very possible that maybe they were trying to stretch out the fight. Like Gervonta Tank Davis right now, I kind of get on his ass a little bit. I'm not going to 100% state that maybe he's avoiding that of Devin Haney, or Shakur Stevenson. They might just be trying to stretch out the fight, kind of like what I thought Canelo was doing. But at the end of the day, once again, the reason why I get on Gervonta's ass so much is because, dude, you're like, what, 30 years old now, 30-0? Like, who the fuck have you ever fought? Like, when the best fighter that you've ever fought is Ryan Garcia, there's a problem.
It became Canelo's mandatory, and Canelo Alvarez, he vacated the belt. It wasn't until HBO put pressure on Canelo to take the...
And once again, there are certain criticisms that you can criticize Canelo with, like him vacating that title at the moment or not fighting Andrade. But you know what? Once again, when it comes down, isn't it very interesting that these guys don't have a problem with Gervonta Tank Davis not fighting Shakur Stevenson? And even Boxing Eagle basically stated that, Shakur Stevenson needs to build his brand up. But why didn't you have that same energy for that of a Demetrius Bupo Andrade? Because what the fuck does Demetrius Bupo Andrade really offer anybody? What did he ever offer anybody? He certainly didn't offer them a big payday when it came down to it. And on top of that, he's a very tough fighter to fight. He doesn't have a big fan base. He doesn't attract overall a whole lot of money. Like, what, but to be fair, he did at least have a belt. So one overall could at least argue that point.
Love can fight.
But of course, Shakur Stevenson also had a belt as of recent.
That's when we got it. And Andre Ward, he confirmed this because he worked for HBO. So outside of the grand wizards of old media like Chris Mannix and Mike Coppinger, no one is giving Canelo a pass anymore. Everyone is going in on him.
Well, he is going to have to fight David Benavidez, or at least, you know, the winner, potentially of Benavidez, if he does fight the unified light heavyweight champion. He's going to have to fight those guys, or people are not going to let that go.
Mike Tyson to Andre Ward to Oscar De La Hoya. It ain't safe no more for Canelo. The walls are closing in again. The last time the walls closed in, he suffered a loss against Dimitri Bivol. This time the walls are closing in, and he may be forced to fight a David Benavidez, a David Morrell, or a Terrence Crawford, a very, very small Terrence Crawford, which would be Canelo Alvarez's best chance of...
And you heard DontaesBoxingNation said a very, very small Terrence Bud Crawford. That's exactly why Canelo Alvarez don't want to fight Terrence Bud Crawford, dude. It's like, why the fuck would he want to fight a Terrence Bud Crawford, where overall, you know, he knows he's not going to get any credit? And then on top of that, Crawford could be potentially a legitimate threat. You know, I'm not stating overall that it might be he would beat Canelo, but it's like Canelo's looking at that like, dude, what do I have to gain in that fight? Like, there's nothing for me to gain.
Winning because he's going to lose to David Benavidez or David Morrell. But I can assure you this, the more announcements that Canelo Alvarez makes when it comes to his next fight, whenever he's fighting someone that's not David Benavidez, that's not like a David Morrell or someone like that, the more his stock will plummet and the more celebrities will come out and criticize him. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.
No more question because I'm a little mad and I'm tired.
But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that. But once again, Canelo is going to have to get in the ring against Benavidez. You know, at least eventually. But we'll see where that goes. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.